change is always possible. Always possible. Always with God. Always. This is why Jesus talked so often about the heart, not behavior modification. And behavior modification is, that's bad news. Jesus being able to transform our hearts is good news.
Hey, everybody. On today's episode of the Live Change podcast, we're talking about just that, change. Whether it's physical, spiritual, or mental, we all have things we fight to change about ourselves. But what does God have to say about the goals we set and the change we truly need in our lives? See, today we're taking complacency head on, and it starts right now. So today I'm joined by my guest here, Jason Mitchell. Good to have you back, buddy.
It's great to be here with you.
It's nice to have you. And we've got Joanna Wishard.
Hey, happy to be here.
Thank you. I'm glad you're happy to be here.
So happy.
Joanna's my co-host here on the Live Change podcast. And so today we're going to be talking about change. And I thought there was no better thing to talk about in change than it's just been a couple weeks. But New Year's resolutions, and I know everyone's sick of it, so please don't turn off the podcast. But I'm just kind of curious: did you guys set New Year's resolutions this year, and are they already gone?
I actually did not set any resolutions this year.
You didn't?
No.
So you've arrived. You're like, nothing to change here.
I'm there.
I am all that is man. I am a specimen.
I think what it was I was just way more focused on. I just honestly forgot. But I don't usually set resolutions. I have set like goals for the year, which I guess is the same thing, right? Whatever you want to call them. But this year I really didn't. No.
Okay, Joanna.
Yeah, no resolutions.
Son of a gun. Yeah.
Did you?
I did. I have like 12.
Oh wow.
I have an app just for my resolutions.
Wow. Okay.
I'm not kidding you.
Are you going to share any of these?
I will absolutely share. You know me, I'm an open book. Much to my wife's chagrin.
Can we give you some? Can we add to your list?
I don't think I paid for the premium app, so I can't add
There's
any.
no more space.
12. Yeah, you would need an app to keep track of all those.
Is this an app specifically designed for goal keeping?
It is habit keeping.
Oh, wow.
I am
That's
keeping
cool.
habits. And one of them was, there's standard stuff like exercising and drinking more water and, consistent time with God. But then I do have one that is and calling mom. She's
okay.
Trying.
Prioritizing relationships there.
Yeah. Rucking.
Rucking?
Rucking is when you walk with a backpack filled with weights.
Yes. Oh, yes.
That is rucking.
Yeah.
I have taken up rucking.
I'm imagining you filling it with rocks. I'm assuming it's a little bit more sophisticated than that. Is it actually?
He's filling it with all his resolutions.
He does have
all
enough.
12 of them.
How dare you? I face judgment. Trying to be the best version of me.
I'm just wondering if they're heavy enough for your backpack.
So I do not have rocks because I wanted some consistency, but I am cheap and trying to live frugally, so I didn't want to also buy like rucking weights.
So just dirt. You feel? Oh,
there's
dirt.
like a whole community like of rucking.
I don't doubt it.
But I got bricks. I bought bricks. And
How are bricks more consistent than rocks if you use the same rocks every
Aren't
time?
bricks square rocks?
No, because I wanted to add weights to my rucking. I wanted to add weights to my rucking journeys.
We understand the concept. We have questions about the execution.
Yeah.
You know something? This is becoming a radically unsafe place for ruckers. So here's my thing is like, so I put these bricks in and
how much does each brick weigh?
I think it's like 4 pounds.
What do you mean you think?
Oh, I forget.
If you were looking for
He wants to be
consistency,
precise.
you have to know.
Oh, well, I forget right now.
Okay, let's just
I'm
go with 4.
relatively new to the sport of rucking.
I feel like we're ganging up on you, Chad. I don't like
No,
that.
that's okay. I actually
I know you don't
am so
mind.
confident in my rucking that I don't mind it. So I'll take these bricks. I wrapped them in duct tape so that they're softer because I tried it without that and that
Oh,
hurts.
yeah, that would hurt.
Yeah, that's called jagged rucking.
Are you being
Also
serious?
sounds like you have a weak backpack.
So here's the kicker, though. Mm-hmm. So this has been a couple weeks now of rucking, where I put on this heavy backpack and I walk. But I don't live close to wooded areas. So I have to do urban rucking.
So you're just walking around the city
Yeah.
with a backpack full of bricks.
It starts in my neighborhood.
You're the weird guy.
I
who's
am.
Like, yeah.
This is
Actually, I was driving home from work last night, and there was a guy in very dark clothes. Was that you?
No, and you should
you
call
need
the
some
police.
reflection if it was.
Here's the thing is like, so I'm walking around my neighborhood.
Yeah.
Well, apparently the word got out because people were telling my kids at school, like, I saw your dad. What's he doing? and people are like, someone stopped and was like, "Hey, are you okay? Like, do you need a lift?" And I was like, "No, I'm rucking."
Oh, it looked like you moved out of your house with how much stuff you had in that backpack.
Oh my goodness.
But it burns twice as many
I was
calories.
going to say, what is the point?
Yeah,
So
it burns a lot
more
of calories. It gives you core. It's a core
Okay.
exercise, and there's a whole club.
I'm proud of you. Seriously,
Thank
like
you.
that's cool.
Exercise.
I've got friends in the military who they'll talk about the rucksack and all that. And so,
Yeah, rucksack.
I'm assuming that's the same.
And all this is I want to be the better person. I want to be a better version of Chad. Because I don't think any of us, and I think we all do. We all have that. So maybe it's not a New Year's resolution, but what is it for you guys that maybe it's something as a family or something for you personally? What do you wish that was different or change, or where is there caution tape and construction happening in your lives?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm on like the goal setting side of things. I don't know. I just feel like resolutions, like even that word, it just like trips me up.
Okay,
So I've
goal
just
setting.
learned more that like that doesn't work.
What goal does
Mine is
happens?
super lame. I'm just trying to take a vitamin every day.
I'm carrying like 30
Because I
pounds of
feel
bricks,
like
and
I
yours is
just-
to carry, eat a vitamin. Is this like a?
You don't eat it; you'd swallow it. They're not Flintstones. I'm eating like grown up or I'm taking grown up vitamins.
They make them gummy. There is adults. If
You know what?
if
I've
you
tried the
take
gummy
gummy
vitamins.
vitamins in your life as an adult, if you are an adult and take gummy vitamins, leave a comment.
Yeah,
and
that
represent.
was me for a season. It's a lot more enjoyable. They just don't have all the right stuff
It's
in
very
them.
bad for your teeth, I've heard too. Like you need to
Yeah.
brush your teeth after every time you eat a gummy.
I wonder if they can make vitamins in other foods, like
Why not just
fruit
put the
roll-up
vitamin
gummies.
in your food, Joanna?
What, like crush it up like you're like a cat?
Yeah, I mean, yes. Or I was going to say, like, if you need vitamin C, why not just eat an orange?
Sure, but also like I don't know, being like a mom on the go, like
Okay,
it's like
the,
that's like at least I know I'm getting it.
convenience.
so you want to eat vitamins.
I want to take a vitamin. I don't want to eat vitamins. I want to take a vitamin.
You know what I mean.
That's
Jason.
good though. That's small winnable goals right there.
Yeah.
Sure, yeah. If you take it,
Yeah.
Have you not?
I've been like half and half.
All right.
It's hard.
You can do it.
I
Believe
think
me.
Follow
doing
a
new
pill?
things, like remembering to do new things, can be hard, or at
Okay.
least for me.
Would you be willing to let me introduce you to my Habit app?
No,
I think it would help. At the end
then it
of
would
the day,
just remind me when I didn't do it,
no.
and
At
I'd
the
be
end of the
annoyed at
day,
it.
if you do all your habits, it gives you confetti.
I
Yeah,
don't-
but the
that
thing
doesn't
is,
motivate me.
Joanna would get the habit app and it'd be like, enter your habits. And she would put in 1 and it would say,
Enter
this app
more.
is not for you. This app is not for you. You need the notes feature.
Yeah, totally.
I was reading some stats, and it's fascinating that literally about half the country every New Year's sets a New Year's resolution. So that means half the country, and way more than that, probably 90% of the country has something that they wish was different about themselves. And they set these resolutions because, I don't know why, but New Year's is just a great chance for the whiteboard to get wiped clean, and you get a new chance to do things. And right about this time, January, February, those New Year's resolutions are gone. And the change that people wanted, prayed for, wished for, bought gym memberships for, it's all gone. Like right around February is when the gyms start emptying out. And the change that people wanted just seems to have passed them by. So today, let's talk about that. Let's talk about change. So like, first off, like, some of the changes that, these are superficial changes, but like, weight loss and exercise, these are all resolutions. But your work ethic, education, money management, relationships, self-care, anger, disorganization. All of this stuff is like these things that you just wish were different, and yet you try, and you bought the books, like you bought the Amazon books on resolutions and stuff and habits and all that stuff, but there's something that just will not change. So why do you think people don't change? Why do you think change eludes people? And it could be little change, big change. Why do you think change is hard for people? I
feel like anytime I've tried to move in a different direction in any of the topics you were saying, like my gravitational pull is to like swing the pendulum so far that it's like, oh my goodness, this change isn't actually possible. That was like way too aspirational. And so then it's like
you're addressing rucking right now. I can tell.
It's like I'm never. You get paralyzed because you're like, oh my gosh, even out of the gate, I've set myself up for failure.
I get it. No, I get it. So you're saying that, like often if you've decided to start climbing hills, you point to Everest and you go, that one.
Yeah. Or even like with the vitamin thing. It's like, I'm going to eat clean and change my entire diet. Yeah. And it's like, actually, maybe one small step would be just try to take a vitamin every day to course correct. Like, instead of trying to change like my whole refrigerator at once.
So one thing that people struggle with change is setting unrealistic goals.
Yeah, I think so. That's for me anyway.
Yeah, that's good. Chase?
Yeah, I was going to say, we don't put sometimes I feel like the things that I've wanted to set out to do and then it didn't end up doing those things usually comes down to sometimes comes down to a structure issue. Like I didn't have the right structure.
Sure.
And that could be, let me try to think of a good example. Like if I want to get a certain amount of calories burned in a month, my Peloton telling me, like that's structure in some ways of getting on the Peloton. Like the Peloton, first of all, provides a structure because it gives me something to do. And then the counting the calories in the, what did I say, calories burned, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that gives me, well, without that, I have to come up with, so sometimes I think you just don't have the right structure around you. Maybe one of the most significant things that ends up affecting our ability to change is just a self-limiting mindset. It still really does come down to our thinking. And the reason why you run to the fridge when you're stressed and you don't even think about it is because you have done that for so long that it is the well-worn path that you have no resistance in anymore. And so you don't even think about those kinds of things. So the reason why change is really hard is because you're literally trying to create a new path. And that one path took time to create.
Yeah.
A new path will take time to create. So you have to, I think in some ways, create almost like a challenge feature when you want to go after the thing that was most natural, to stop it and to redirect and make your new path towards, let's say it was to a glass of wine at the end of a long day, and now it's to a book. So the structure stuff kind of comes into the wine goes away or out of the house, right? That's a structure thing, because if that's a goal of yours, let's just say, right? And then you put the book where it's easy to get to. I mean, I'm making something up right now.
Yeah, no,
I'm just trying to say,
totally.
like, if that's what you want to move towards or whatever, but you have to redirect. I just think the reason change is so hard is because there's a reason you didn't change, and there's a reason you've been doing life the way you've been doing it. So our most natural sort of course is always going to be towards least resistance.
But I guarantee some people that are struggling with some of these things that they can't seem to change because like they are a life changed by Christ. So there's some people out there that they can't get their money in order, or they're yelling at their kids and they're dealing with their anger, and they're like, I try to change, and I'm a life changed by Christ, and yet I can't change some of these most simple things. Like, if Jesus is changing me for eternity, why can't I cut up the credit card? It does play something spiritual. And do you think there's a spiritual component of it that, especially for those of us that are Christians, have things that just won't let go?
Yeah, I think some of it is leaning into why you're setting the goal.
Oh, okay.
And so I think, I don't know, even for me, probably like today, Joanna versus, I don't know, even Joanna in college, it was like, why am I setting this goal? What am I hoping happens as a result? And then why? And then how am I not doing that? Like, on my own, or like, is it a result of more who I believe God is creating me to be? Or like in college, it was like, well, what's serving Joanna right now to get things that Joanna wants?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I think then like over that, I don't know, just kind of like even the refinement of like, wait, maybe I should be asking myself, why am I actually making this goal?
Oh, that's good.
To get me closer to then even a goal that I have more, passion or conviction than to follow through on, because the why matters more.
Yeah.
Where then it was in college, it was like, oh, I want to eat out less. I'm trying to save money. I need to pay rent, whatever. And it's like, well, a lot of that is maybe even serving my purpose, not kind of like a greater purpose.
Another reason why it's so hard to change is because we focus on the external. We focus on the behavior as opposed to and this is maybe what you were getting at a little bit, Joanna, is the root of where the behavior comes from. So I have a friend who his goal was a certain goal with, I don't know if it was weight loss, but it was more exercising every single day and all this kind of stuff. And he went into his account and for this particular app or whatever, and his username was I am an athlete. And he did that very intentional because he basically was saying, my identity that's who I am. Mm-hmm. I'm an athlete. And if you were to look at him, I mean, you'd be like, no, you're not, but it doesn't matter. He's believing that because he knows, and I think we all know that our actions tend to come out of what we believe to be most true about who we are. I've got my brother-in-law, actually, he wanted to stop eating meat. He was finding that it wasn't good for him. And so the next day, he just stopped. And the way he started telling people was like, when they would ask him, he'd be like, oh no, I'm a vegetarian. This was like day one.
Wow.
Not I'm trying to stop eating meat. Mm-hmm. It was I am a vegetarian. It's a different statement. It's a different sort of place.
Now you're getting into the identity piece.
Yeah.
And that's really exciting because that's getting deeper.
Yeah.
That's the next level. So like
it's like the rucksack that you're talking about, like rucking, whatever. It's like there's two ways you can talk about that. One is I'm trying to lose weight. The other is again, like go back to that example, like, oh, I do this because I'm an athlete.
Yes. I think a lot of that came from the book Atomic Habits. Mm-hmm. The author's name eludes me.
James Clear. Yeah,
James Clear. He writes about that identity piece, where it's shaping you're not adopting a habit, you're adopting a persona, a lifestyle.
Yes.
And adopting the habits in turn.
Yes.
By that.
And think about it at a spiritual level, right? This is why Jesus talked so often about the heart, not behavior modification. And behavior modification is, that's bad news.
Yeah.
Jesus being able to transform our hearts is good news, because if it's behavior modification, it's like, I've got to go figure out how to do all these things and look the part for Jesus and do more right things and less bad things and all that. That's a burden. Jesus actually talks about, he was talking about at one point, he says, out of the heart, the mouth speaks. Out of the heart comes murderous, I think he actually has murderous thoughts and lust and all these things. And he's basically saying your actions and all that come from somewhere deeper. And Jesus saying, I want to change that. And so, I think one of the reasons we struggle with that, let's just say you set a goal with finances, you were mentioning that earlier, Chad. The deeper question that we need to ask too is, it's not just, should I cut up credit cards? That might be a structural thing to help you with some of that, but why am I not content? That's the hard issue, contentment. And how do I let Jesus have more of my heart related to contentment? When it comes to exercise or even your physical health, it's like, my body is a temple, right? That's what Paul says in one of his letters to the Corinthians. what does it look like then to worship God with my body?
Yeah.
What does it mean to worship God? So I'm ready to advance the kingdom of God in this world. I'm physically healthy enough to be there for my friends and family and all that. So now it's about more like a heart issue than just it's kind of what's fueling it.
I think the identity piece is so critical, and it applies so much with spiritual. So we get caught up in two kinds of identity. We get caught up in the negative identity. We get caught up in the positive identity. But then there's this, Jason, you talk about this a lot, the identity is already set. So in a second, I'm going to have you speak to that. But like, there's people out there that are listening to this podcast right now, and you have determined that you will be the first to say the fat joke because I am fat. You have determined that you will be the first to say the I'm poor joke because you know that you have lots of debt and you've already got one bankruptcy, and you're saying like, I'm just poor. And you start to make these identity statements of I'm this. And they become of the negative version of yourself, the least version of yourself, the less.
And I think that's what I was meaning when I was saying limiting mindsets.
Yes.
Like we take on those limiting mindsets.
Yes. But then there's the positive, like you said, I'm the athlete. I'm good with money. These positives. But tell me about, then there's a bigger one. The umbrella term, like I'm a child of God.
Right. I'm a child of God. I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. I am strong and courageous because God has given me everything I need for the, what does it say in Romans? The same spirit that rose Jesus from the dead lives in me. So I don't have to give in to this thing. Like that's then really beginning to claim the truth of who we are, who God says we are, in order to live differently.
Oh man, this is really powerful.
And now, I think some of those statements then help you also get to the right goals. And so,
that's good.
Like, I think that so much of that, like it all has to work together. Like, or at least like, that's when I know, like, then I've set myself up for a better chance of success, versus like, when you don't have all that kind of.
And we're going to talk about that because it's very much so like working on the painting the shutters of a house that has a rocky foundation, that has a broken foundation. It's like, you can paint this, but there's other things there. So now we live in a culture that, is celebrating not changing. So I'm going to give you guys a second on this one because this one's real. Okay. What is the difference between contentment and self-confidence and complacency? So there is a culture out there that's saying there is body positivity. Is there a danger of slipping past that into complacency of not just accepting what is instead of what could be?
Or it's kind of like the hiding behind the whole, like, I'm just being my authentic self.
Yeah.
Authenticity is a word that so many people use as a mask to mask what they feel is unchangeable. Yeah.
Or unhealthy.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that we do that's like, I was just being authentic. It's like, oh, well, you were a jerk. Like, you shouldn't have said that. It's like, well, I was just being authentic to myself. I mean, like, so again, we know that practically doesn't work in every situation.
Yeah.
The issue with it's even interesting to think about that phrase, the best version of myself. That's an interesting phrase and probably should be challenged to a degree. I understand the sentiment behind that. But there's parts of me I don't want to be a better version of. In fact, I want God to kill off. And so Jesus isn't there to make us a better version of ourselves. Jesus came to make us more like him, to shape us and conform us into his image. And part of that is the whittling down, the whittling effect. There's pain with that, and there's a little bit of, you've got to conform to his will. Yeah. So, all that to say, I think sometimes we do hide behind that whole authenticity piece to just, I don't know, not challenge maybe some of the ways that that we're living that aren't best.
Okay. Yeah, and again, it's not any one particular thing that needs to change in our lives. It's so many people basically they just become resolute in the fact that this is who they are, and perhaps they replace that fear of being judged with confidence. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm just going to be confident in this version of myself. Mm-hmm. So would you say complacency would you say the root of this is it's one thing to be self-confident and stuff, but do you think people have become complacent with where they're at? Because here's the thing, the Bible says, Jace, confirm for this for me. Jesus says, I've come to give you life and have it to the full. Now, I know he was talking very spiritual and eternal in that, but do you think that we've become complacent in the version of our life?
I would say, me personally, I've certainly had seasons where, yes, things that aren't great in my life, patterns, the way I speak to my kids or the way I handle my money or whatever it might be, becomes normal, but it doesn't mean it's best. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know if it's complacency. I mean, I guess it's complacency if you know it and you don't care. It's ignorance, I guess, if you don't know it.
Yeah.
So I think if God illuminates, like if there's something in our life that we feel our conscience is dinged on, we feel like we feel conviction, we feel nothing, and we ignore that. That I would say is complacency. Mm-hmm.
Is it a sin?
Yes. To not follow through on your conscience. Yes.
So when we feel that, when we feel the sting of complacency, when we feel the sting of like, God's calling me to something better, but I'm going to stay. Yeah.
I mean, again, Paul talks about that, and I don't remember which letter he talks about that, but he talks about our consciences, not basically it's a sin to go against your conscience. So I'm looking at it probably more from the conscience, like when your conscience is hitting you, like ding, 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 like that was wrong, or, that was kind of off, and you ignore that. And what's interesting about that is that contextualizes itself differently in different people's lives. Mm-hmm. See, and I think that's actually the context that Paul's talking about, because he's saying, for Joanna, for you, your conscience might get dinged on the amount of time you're spending on Netflix. Mm-hmm. I'm just making up a scenario here.
Well, yeah, that's what I was just sitting here thinking. It's like, I know for me, it's like, that's like, the third night in a row of like scrolling Instagram.
So you're getting dinged by that, but that might not be
totally
what's getting me. And that's where you got to be careful. You're not prescribing that on others.
Oh, that's good.
But that's, so if you know that, mm-hmm. and you willingly ignore that, I think God's saying, I'm trying to deal with you with something here.
Yeah.
And you're ignoring me. And for me, it might be completely different topic, but I got my own thing.
Yep. And I think too, like with that, I know I notice it when I'm turning inward, where it's like, versus like I'm pouring out, or like, leaning into like God's plan versus like Joanna's plan. Mm-hmm. And so I can feel that for myself too, when it's like, oh, you're like bucking what God's asking you to like lean into. Instead, you're kind of stepping back into like your own comfort zone or what.
It just made me think as well of like when Paul talks about the ability for grace to be abused and sort of misunderstood. And it's almost like, well, I'm loved for who I am. God's given me all the grace and all that. It's like, yes, absolutely. No one's going to, or like, that's the gospel. God is, Jesus Christ has given his life for you before you did anything. But then Paul says, but don't think that that's a license to sin. Like, that's not a license to just live however you want. So you've got this tension that lives there of, well, I'm loved how I am. But you can't settle just for staying there either. Mm-hmm. So it's that tension of like, they're both true.
So, like, part of life change, and we talk about life change at LCBC Church all the time, but part of life change is changing behavior.
Yeah.
And
Because your identity's been changed.
yes,
One of the things we'll talk about in our home is like, man, that's not what Mitchells do. That's not who we are. Right.
Mhm.
And so that's sort of like when you come into the family of God, see, he changes. I'm a child of God now.
Yeah.
So I'm a son of God. I'm a daughter of God. Like, so the reason I take care of my body isn't a rule. It's because my identity's been changed and I want to honor God in every aspect of life.
because this body was a gift from
Because this body was a gift. The reason I live on less than I make is not because it's a rule. It's because it's a gift, and so I want to be ready to respond generously or whatever
It's
it might
God's
be.
money.
I want to
I see what
it's
you're
God's
doing.
money. So
yeah,
it changes your identity, which then changes your actions. And that's I think what I'm trying to get at is more just saying, get at that stuff
Yes.
first.
it's like the whole athlete thing. Do athletes go to bed early? Do athletes,
That's
work
what
out every
athletes
day?
do. Yeah.
And now you're just changing it to that big picture. What does a Christian do?
Yeah.
You know,
Yes.
like, how does a Christian answer that question? How does a Christian take care of their body? How does a Christian address their neighbor? How does a Christian, keep their household in order?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
that's a worldview. That's a change in worldview, because I think some people rest in what you said. It's an abuse of grace, but they rest in, I love Jesus, but I am no different than anyone else.
Mm-hmm. And you get real clear the big things. So, like the big things are real clear. Christians don't, like we don't, go to the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 6, and 7, and you'll get real clear, like we don't cheat on our spouses.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Doesn't mean you don't make mistakes. I'm trying to say, like, that's part of what it means to be a Christian. Now, Christians have done that, and there's forgiveness. David in the Bible did that, and there's forgiveness. So that's not what we're talking about. But you're gonna pay. I mean, there's consequences to sin too. But then there's the ones that you're not going to find in the Bible how much Netflix you should watch.
Yeah.
And you're not going to find in the Bible, what price car you should buy.
That's good.
That's where that's my point earlier. Like, that's where your conscience kind of kicks in, and God will lead and direct you because you have the Holy Spirit living inside you, and you need to pay attention to that. So for you, it might be, oh man, to spend $100,000 on that car is like, I don't know. I just feel like there's a better use. Okay. You should pay attention to that. And then for another person, 100,000, like, no, I'm good.
Yeah.
And that's fine. So that's where you got to be real careful about, like, not, again, prescribing conscious stuff. The big stuff's real clear in the New Testament.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think that there was, Joanna, you rocked the 90s, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, you were younger, but there used to be this thing, WWJD.
Yeah.
Like, what would Jesus do? It was a filter. It was like, what would Jesus do? And it's a shame that it became so cliche and
yeah, right,
brazened on jewelry, because it was a good worldview of asking what does
Christian means little Christ. The word means little Christ. So I mean, like, at the most fundamental level, it's a pretty kind of, I mean, is it a good thing to aspire to? Like, it's a good would Jesus punch that person? No.
Yeah.
Right.
The it's interesting, like, so as we talk about this, as we talk about becoming more and more like Jesus, what do you say to the person that is saying, like, I've tried to make these changes and I don't have the strength, I don't have the willpower, because it's not fair to just go, like, God wants you to lose 50 pounds. Okay, good. That's great. I don't have the willpower.
Yeah, I think I'm really glad I don't have to go from, like, complacency to perfection.
Oh, go on.
So I just think, like, there's a lot of room between realization and, like, then taking steps towards that thing. And so I'm real glad when I said, hey, Jesus, like, I'm all in, I'm following you, that it wasn't like, great, so then starting tomorrow, Like you need to do X, Y, and Z. Like that's, so
Yeah.
I think like whether it's like the discernment light or like that conscious piece, like starts turning back on, seeing things differently. Like that's awesome. But thank goodness we don't have to go from realization to perfection.
Well, if you're a follower of Jesus, your life should be distinctive.
Ooh, I like that.
It should. There are distinctive. Yes, I mean, like, it was the reason why the first Christians were persecuted. I mean, they were ostracized and persecuted and beaten. And man, I don't want to go back to that. But let's just go back there I don't now. But let's go back to that day for a second. The reason why is because it was obvious they were Christians. Now, on the other hand, I'm always intrigued by, I think it was Joseph of Arimathea, where it says it describes him, he was a secret disciple.
Oh.
And he was a disciple. So he was in process. And we always read about the heroes in the New Testament, in the book of Acts, in the early church, and Paul and Timothy and these guys, right? They're leaders. And we have to remember that sometimes too. So part of what I think I'm trying to do now, I'm trying to soften it up and be gracious with yourself.
Because I think it's both. That's
it is
good.
both.
I'm glad you're doing that. It's two sides.
These guys are all leaders, but we see them. So these are like Navy SEAL Christians because they're the ones who else are you going to write about?
Yeah.
Because they're the ones actually going out and doing the thing. So how many more, literally thousands, you never read about, and they're just making shoes in Philippi. And like, that's the guy who just, he got up and he was just making shoes for people in the village, in the town, or in the city. And he was a disciple too. You'll never read about him, but he was kind of figuring it out. And he was kind of one step forward and two steps back. And that's, I think, more typical.
Sure.
And so, but that's not a reason not to keep moving. It's not a reason not to keep whatever. So the answer to your question about like, should our Netflix, I don't know if you were asking, you were just saying our Netflix should look different, the way that is true. I think it's true. Like it should reflect the heart of God for this world, the things we consume, the ways we treat people, all of that. But that doesn't happen, Joanna, you brought this up. It doesn't happen within 24 hours for most people.
Yeah.
And it's allowing Jesus to transform, allowing Jesus and him to speak into those things.
Yeah.
No, that's really good. So, okay. So do you think that God has a ultimate potential for us? Like, do you think God thinks that there's more that Chad could be living up to? Because here's the thing. You said, those were Navy SEAL Christians. And I'm going to just go, do you think that some of us are supposed to be Navy SEAL Christians and we're not because we don't try?
I think we're supposed to be I think we're supposed to be faithful. And if God is putting opportunities in front of you to take more risk and exercise more faith, you should do that.
Yeah.
But I don't think everyone is called to go overseas and give up their job to go do. I think some people might be.
Yeah.
But I don't think everybody is. So I don't know what I know everybody is called to is, if you're a Christian, if you're a follower of Jesus, is to be faithful and love God and love others faithfully.
Yeah.
In the context he's given you.
Okay, so I'm gonna bring us back to very specifically with change. So there's someone out there listening, and they're saying like they're in their target for how they want to be different, whether it's physical or mental or financial, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
They have a target, but the target isn't themselves. The target is someone else.
What do you mean?
They want to be someone else. They want to be. They're saying, I want to be like her. I want to be like him. I want to look like her. I want to have what he has. Is there a toxicity of that sense of jealousy? Is there, tell me about that of trying to be not the best version of yourself, but to be the best version of themselves?
Yeah. I mean, that's a pretty slippery slope to go down for lots of reasons.
Because even for Christians, because like I know pastors that are like, I want to be like Andy Stanley.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe even for you. I mean,
yeah, no. I mean, the comparison game is toxic, and it affects, and especially in our world today, where it's so easy to always see the highlight reels of everybody else and everything God's doing in their life, or all the ways that they're making more money now, or now they're living in that house, or they're got that many followers on Instagram or YouTube, and so that's real. I mean, and that happens. I think everybody fundamentally probably knows it's not healthy, and yet it's like a drug we can't quite get off of for some reason, like to keep thinking. I would just say, first of all, God has uniquely positioned you where he has you, and it's dishonoring, I think, to God to what's the word? I don't know. I was going to say to loathe that. That's probably way too strong of a word. But, God, you're fearfully and wonderfully made.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He knit you. That's Psalm 139, right? He knit you together in your mother's womb. Yeah. That means he made you, your personality, who you are, your gifts, your strengths, your passions, for a very real purpose and meaning in this world. And so I think to sort of dismiss that and to just long and always, to use a word that you like to use, pine.
Oh, it's such a great word.
To long for something else, I think is, I don't know, it's a little bit dishonoring of what God's done for you and done in you and what he has for you. But, you got to get comfortable with who he's made you to be.
Mm-hmm.
So, I for a lot of reasons, I want to ask this. Like, there's a gal that's listening out there that hates the look in the mirror. There's a person that just wishes they could be someone else, and they try change, but their change is based on a very unhealthy look on the other side. So what would you say to that, Joanna?
I think that's really hard. Like, to be in that spot where, I mean, some of that just is from like a discontentment.
Oh, go on. Discontentment.
Yeah, because I mean, if that like, I think some of that is like we want to be content, but then you see what someone else has and you want that thing. So then like you're in this like, oh, well, like it really is, I think, at the root a little bit of just like discontentment. And that can be really hard to work through. Yeah, so I think, I probably would just say I've been there. I have some pretty specific guardrails on what I will and won't follow on my Instagram account for that very reason. Because I know to like see what on Instagram looks like the perfect mom kills me. I can't play that game. Like, and also then the reminder that like, those aren't my kids. That's not my family. I actually don't need to do what that family does. And so some of it I just think is like naming it. And then I think sometimes like we do have to put up guardrails to then get in between us and that, like access to that feeling, if you will. And I don't get it right all the time.
Sure.
But I think like just, I mean, even in kind of like the motherhood segment, I guess, like, I mean, I've been in it for 7 years, so I'm still very new to it, but I've also learned enough that it's like, that's not good for my mind. That's not good for my contentment. That's not good for the story God's writing for me.
But I think what you're getting at, Joanna, is it starts with you. You're challenging it. You're challenging what feeds and fuels that discontentment or that sense of I need to change for the wrong reasons or whatever it might be.
Yes.
And that's what I think I don't know if we do that a ton. And so you're sitting there going, what fuels it? Oh, this, and that. Well, then I need to stop feeding myself those things and redirecting my thoughts towards these things.
What is the motivation of the change? So
Yeah.
if the motivation of your change is to be like someone that you are not, that's a wrong motivation. If your motivation for working harder isn't because I want to be a good steward, but because I want the boat, and you trade
and
your
it's so
family
hard
time
to
for
know,
it.
man. It's so hard to
Yeah.
know. You've got to be very self-aware on that kind of stuff. That's very hard. That's a very fuzzy line.
I appreciate the fact that we talk about the fuzzy lines. We talk about the gray.
Yeah.
It's not easy. There's not an easy answer.
And sometimes, to be honest, I just go, so for me, the fuzzy lines are like success. How's the church doing? Are we meeting the goals that we're setting out to do? And then my mind will play tricks on me. And I'm like, oh, is that just about you? Is that just about making you look good and all that? And then you'll get crazy. And you're like, well, I think it's from God. Well, maybe that's just you. And then at some point you're like, because the line's fuzzy, right? So that's like for me. Sometimes what I just do, I go, God, you're way more gracious than I. So you know my heart.
Yeah.
And if it's wrong, correct it. But if it's like give yourself some grace too. Like you don't have to overthink the whole thing. And it's like, I think my heart's right, but maybe it's not. I don't know. And then it's like, okay, God knows.
Okay.
He's pretty gracious.
So let's end with a conversation, because there's going to be people listening here and they're going to say, Jason, I have no problem with the changes. God's working on me. I'm a work in progress. I got a lot of changes for the person in my life, like the other person. Like the changes, like I'm doing pretty good, but my spouse stinks. I really want to change him. So
what do
you? Yeah. So what do you say to the person that says that?
You ought to talk. You ought to be open. You ought to be honest. At the end of the day, your relationship should be built on with anybody. So that's one example, like a marriage relationship, but even with a kid that you want to see change, or a parent that you want to see change, or whatever it might be. You have to go to sleep at night with the integrity of knowing I've voiced everything I need to voice. I've been honest. I've told them what my expectations are. There continues to be a gap, and now I let go. You have to, that's all I'm trying to say, is like the letting go is like I can't make them do anything. Now you may have boundaries that's a whole nother conversation.
Okay.
So you may have boundaries you're going to have to draw. So, hey, if you don't quit doing that, we're going to have to get separate checking accounts. That's a boundary you may have to draw, but you got to let go. The resentment, man, that really, really grows in the belief, or in the soil of I can change someone.
I see. So sometimes, and sometimes there's really unhealthy, toxic habits, and I get that. But sometimes we have created this image of what we want in a spouse, wants in a child, the expectations, and when they dip below those expectations, or what we've seen in our mind, sometimes it becomes very unhealthy because we want them to live up to expectations.
Well, they may be right expectations. They may be realistic.
Sure.
I think anytime someone doesn't live up to the expectations that you have to ask yourself a couple of questions. Number one, have you even articulated those expectations? Because if you're expecting them to live up to something that you haven't articulated, that's not fair.
Yeah.
I mean, we've all been on the receiving end of someone mad at us or whatever, like, oh, I didn't even know you were expecting me home at that time.
Yeah.
So, whatever. So one, you have to ask that. Secondly, if you've articulated it, you need to say, is it realistic? Is that a realistic expectation or not? And if it is a realistic expectation, like it's legit, then you got to go, what am I going to do in that gap? And you're probably going to have to, my guess is, draw boundaries and all that, figure out what the boundaries are, but you just can't. The worst thing to do would try to be to force them. And that's why we start nagging.
Yeah.
And that's why that's all an attempt to force someone to change.
So it's control. You talked about that in
we've
another
talked
podcast.
about that. Yeah.
What did you say? You said care leads to concern, and sometimes it derails to control.
Yeah, if you're not careful, it can disguise itself as that.
So we care for our children, become concerned for our children,
and then you have exactly. Then you have the There's like a defining line there of like, are you going to cross over? Are you going to trust them with God, or are you going to cross over and now try to be God in their life?
Oh,
My mom always told me that she was
good.
like one of the commitments we made, and I went off the rails. And she was like, one of the commitments we made was I wasn't going to be the Holy Spirit in your life. And you know what that did? When the Holy Spirit when I finally opened my heart up to the Holy Spirit working, I was safe with them to go back to them.
Mm-hmm.
They hadn't pushed me away.
Oh man. Okay.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Someone needed to hear that today.
So because they committed that they were just going to love me and be rules. I mean, like they had all that, the expectations too. It's not like that went away, but they weren't going to try to change me. We know what that means. It's like you start nagging and beating down and all that kind of stuff.
Oh,
it's like, I'm going to shame you into behavior.
Totally.
Yeah.
That's what I think she was meaning when she said, we're not going to be the Holy Spirit. We're not going to try to be the thing that changes you.
Yeah.
Because of that, when I truly was like, oh God, you're working in my life, I knew I could go to them because I still had the relationship with them.
Yeah. And I think a lot of assumption can happen if we're not asking some of those questions too. And so like, I think in my own life, even I've had friends like where you're just assuming also that you're operating out of the same worldview. And so then when you try to get change into play, then that becomes like a whole hot mess of a situation because you're not even starting out of the same worldview.
Wow,
and then
that is
trying
so
to,
good.
Or even like someone just gives their life to Christ and you've been walking with Jesus for like 21
Totally.
years. And it's like, dude, why would you expect them? They're a baby. So it's like, oh, well, you need to do this, and that. It's like, hold up, man. Jesus was pretty patient with people.
Wow, that's powerful. That's really good. So kind of to wrap up, like, when it talks about, people's potential and do you think that, if you could kind of give people advice that are, listening to this and saying like, I don't think I'm reaching, the potential that God has for me. What would you say to that? And what could happen if they started to aspire to reach their fullest potential? And I say potential, not their best self, but potential, like, what God, kind of wants for them, the better life that God wants for them. What advice would you give them if they're kind of saying like, I kind of want to do things differently? What spiritually what track would you put them on?
I'd probably say to do the small little things that demonstrate faithfulness to Jesus, and the potential reveals itself. I mean, I would just be careful about being too hard on yourself we may have expectations for our life that Jesus doesn't even have. And so it's like, again, go back to the basics. Jenny is always so good about reminding me about this. She's like, well, what do we know? Like, I'm like, oh, I feel like I should be this, or I feel like we should be about this. And she's always just bringing me back. She's like, hey, just love God and love other people. Like it really does kind of come down to, so that is your greatest potential. Your fullest potential is realized when you're doing that. And I think God will make clear to you sort of the surroundings, so how that gets demonstrated and as you go, but we sometimes overthink it.
That's good.
It's like, what's my life supposed to be about? What's my life supposed to be about? It's like, well, love God, love others, and go make disciples.
Yeah.
And you're probably good. Well, you're not. That's what Jesus said to do. So you're definitely good.
Yeah. And I think, I know for me, like checking yourself against someone farther ahead in you, like, or farther ahead in life than you.
That's good.
Like, again, like just don't try to go at it alone.
So seek
like wise counsel.
Yeah. Wise counsel. Like who's your inner circle?
Yeah.
Of people that can advise you. So, in the end, I think, everyone, listening to us, like there's some people that had given up, and I think our hope and prayer is that, whatever the change might be, we're prayerful that they will find it.
Change is always possible, always possible, always with God, always. Romans 12:1-2 says, offer yourselves as a living sacrifice, for this is what's pleasing to God. And it says, and do not be conformed to the patterns of this world, the behaviors and customs of this world, but let God transform you by the renewing of your mind. Transformation that is what God does. He transforms dead things to alive things.
Yeah.
So that's what he does. So change is always possible.
And when you start to look at it from the perspective of God, saying like, this is God's money, this is God's body, this is God's, fill in the blank. These are God's kids. And how does that change how you use it?
Yeah.
So, well, it's great conversation, guys. So God bless everyone listening to this, and we'll keep going. Each week we're going to come back here and we're going to keep talking about how to live change. If we're a life changed by Christ, how do we live that change out each day? Thank you for subscribing. We always appreciate those of you who subscribe. And just as a reminder, someone needs to hear what you just heard. Who is it? Make sure you send it to them. All right. God bless. Take care.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to follow the show, send today's episode to a friend, and leave a review. The Live Changed podcast is produced by LCBC Church. LCBC stands for Lives Changed by Christ. We are one church in multiple locations across Pennsylvania. For more information about LCBC, resources from this episode, and ways to grow in your relationship with Jesus, go to lcbcchurch.com.